So I'm going to talk a bit about volunteering on Skomer, which I've done for a few years, and it's going to turn it into the wildlife of Skomer and the other Welsh islands. And the first thing is, here's me as a volunteer, and I'm on Skomer and I'm on duty. And you can see from the picture that it's a wild and woolly island. It's high up, and I'm about halfway up the island. This is the bay where the boat arrives, and these people have just arrived and have been allowed onto the rest of the island. They've got to climb another 100 feet roughly, and they have already climbed up 87 steps. And everything that comes onto the island and goes off it goes up or down those 87 steps. We're talking west of, and these 4 islands. So you should be able to see my cursor. Skomer, Ramsey Island, Grasholm further out to sea. These 3 are very near. They're only a couple of miles off the coast. This is the big harbour at Milford Haven. This is Haverfordwest, the county town. The great city of St David's is so small you can't actually see it, but it's out here. So we're not talking about anywhere in the wilds of Greenland. We're talking about somewhere just off the Welsh coast, about 150 miles from here. So it's easy to get to. And this is Skomer, which I'm mostly going to talk about, and it's about a square mile. And visitors land here in North Haven, and then up the 87 steps, and then a climb up to the top. And the rest of the island is pretty well a plateau. And these are the paths you're allowed on, and more of that a bit later. I volunteer for a week every year, except that hasn't happened the last 2 years, obviously not last year. And the year before I had a new knee and was getting it back working again. So the volunteer tasks are divided into visitor management, wildlife, and a bit of maintenance. So visitor management, there's a bit of housekeeping, you're a chamber person, and my favorite, the composting toilets. We keep them clean. Boat traffic, we get people on and off the island, and we unload and load luggage and cargo. And that's very important. There is no proper harbour. What you do, the boat drives up to some old tyres at the appropriate stage of the tide, stays with its engine running, and people jump off the front of the boat. There's a certain amount of mobility required. And then island patrol, which is basically making sure the visitors do not fall off the cliff, do not damage the wildlife, and get back to their boats on time. And then there's wildlife management, which is partly island patrol, and that's the security of the wildlife. We do a bird and general wildlife log, which is done every day, and the records go back 70 years. And then we do specific surveys, and you'll see all this happen. And then one day a week, so we do maintenance. And here are a load of visitors arriving. You can see the various tyres. There's a tide of about 8 meters, I guess. So the boat rams its bow up against the suitable set of tyres, and people jump off, grabbed by a volunteer who then puts them up the hill, up the 87 steps. So it's a bit of a confrontation when you get there. You've got 87 steps to climb. And if you're there for a period, like the volunteers are, you carry all your food with you and drink. And you are greeted at the level I showed you earlier by the wardens, voluntary or paid, and a talk about the island and opportunity to hire binoculars and buy water. That's it. That's the commercial aspect of the island. And what the warden will tell you about is what you can and can't do. And here's a school party, and the kids really enjoy coming here. It's a bit of wild for them. And what you can and can't do is written here, one sentence in 18 languages. We get visitors from all over the world. It's a wildlife high spot for everybody. So we get lots of Americans, lots of Australians, South Africans, Europeans of all sorts, the odd Chinese and Japanese. The island is occupied by 1 million seabirds, most of which live in tunnels under the ground, along with bunny rabbits. We have puffins and we have Manx shearwaters, and there are 30,000 plus puffins, and there are nearly 1 million Manx shearwaters when the chicks are hatched, and they're everywhere. So that's why you have to stay on the paths, and that is strictly observed for everyone on the island, from the warden downwards, because we're there to protect the wildlife. This is the seasonal timeline for the islands. We're now beginning of April here. All our seabird migrants have arrived. The puffins are there, razorbills, guillemots, Manx shearwaters. Some have come further than others. The razorbills tend to stay fairly local. The puffins wander over the whole North Atlantic, and the Manx shearwater come from Patagonia in southern Argentina. And also we have a couple of botanical events. During May, the island turns completely blue with bluebells, and then a month later turns completely pink with red campion. So that's kind of shorthand timeline for the island. This is one of the visitors to the island. It's northern fulmar. They're pretty common around all Britain's western coasts, but they breed on the island. There's about 1,000 pairs, and they're brilliant flyers. And I'm just going to show you what this, if you like, a fulmar's eye view of about half an hour of flight. And it didn't flap its wings once. And just see what it is seeing. So that bird has seen a fair variety of terrain. Sea cliffs with lots of nesting birds, flat bits with posts sticking out the ground and lots of holes and birds, sea covered with birds. There are birds everywhere. Remember I said, when you're there, you're sharing the island with 1 million birds. This is the island as seen from the edge, and you can see the terrain is actually pretty flat once you get up on the cliffs. This is the farm, which is the center of everything. It's where the volunteers live. There are a couple of ponds, and you can see one of them here, and there are a lot of rocky outcrops, and it's surrounded by water, obviously. And here is me with my volunteer companions. So there were 4 of us. It was a late season volunteering session. Normally there are 6 for peak season, but late on there's not so many visitors and we can cope with 4. But it's an interesting time to come, the beginning of September, because the shearwater chicks are learning to fly. And very shortly after they learn to fly, they fly to Argentina on their own. They've never done it before. And this is a shearwater on the the door of the Skomer Arms, which is our common room. And there's the common room. There's a chest fridge, and you've got one drawer each for your refrigerated goods. There is a gas cooker. There are solar powered lights which go off at night. There's an emergency lighting system, and you have to have a rotor to cook and wash up. And it's comfortable enough. It's a bit more civilized than camping, and it's fun. This is the most important place on the island. It is the only public toilet, and you have to climb the stairs to use it. There are 4 toilets, and they are composting toilets. So whatever it is you produce drops down to the ground floor, where it ferments and composts and produces a completely innocuous compost. And they work pretty well. There are fan-driven ventilators on each one to get rid of any odors, but they're pretty good. They work pretty well. And this is that central building, the farm, part of which is still in ruins deliberately. It's a bat roost and the home for wildlife. This is the bird log in the evening, where we recount what we've seen all day, and that goes into the 80-year-old record. And this is Ed, the then warden, and B, his wife, who was jointly warden with Ed. And these are a couple of the weekly volunteers reporting on what they've seen. And this is a place called the Wick. You can see all these posts and holes. Each post marks a puffin nest, and it enables you to do surveys of the birds. You know which hole is which, and hopefully which bird lives in which hole. And this is what we're looking at. We're looking at a cliff edge with some puffins. And then we have this big cliff. It's about 1/4 of a mile long, 200 feet high, called the Wick. And it has enormous numbers of seabirds. You can see them here. The puffins don't live on the cliff. They live on the sandy slopes surrounding the cliff. And the birds on the cliffs are kittiwakes, northern fulmars, guillemots, and razorbills. So here's a fulmar with its chick, a rather nice picture, courtesy of the Skomer wardens. I've taken all the other pictures myself pretty well. I'll do the photo attribute at the end. And there are about 1,000 nests on Skomer. And you can see it's pretty precarious. Northern fulmar, this one's actually taken by me in Cornwall. It's called a tube nose. You can see its nose, and it's not a gull. It's very closely related to the albatrosses, are also tube noses, and it's built like an albatross, and it very rarely flaps its wings unless it absolutely has to. And these nests are scattered around the cliff, individual birds, but fairly close together. And there are about 1,000 of those on Skomer as well. And this is something I observed. When Madam is on the nest incubating, she can't move. And hubby comes back every now and again. And what he does is 100 yards back, he dives down, picks up speed, and then zooms up here and stalls at that moment and gives a loud cry to Mrs. and then dives down again. And they'll do that over and over again. And it really is a sign of affection. They are, they mate pretty well for life, and it's nice to see. People come to Skomer to see puffins, and they're very nice to see, but once you've seen one puffin, you've seen the lot. This one's coming into land, and they do it very short landings right over their hull, because if they're coming back with fish, there are blackback gulls and herring gulls willing to steal it off them, so they ambush them. This one was lucky. there's plenty of food for the birds around Skomer. It's a booming bird island. The population seem to pretty well go up about 10% every year, which is unusual because the puffin is a threatened bird. There are puffin reeds on Iceland and up in Norway with 1 million birds that have not had a chick in 10 years. The food resources have gone. They're very long-lived birds, so you don't notice it, but on Skomer, there's plenty of food at the moment, and these are sand eels, and they can get about 30 in their bills. And you want another shot? You want my left profile? Here it is. They do seem to pose. And here, again, courtesy of Skomer wardens, is a pair of puffins and their chick, which looks nothing like them. None of the elaborate coloured bill and feet. Fairly nondescript black and white bird with an ordinary beak called a puffling. And they'll grow the bill in their first breeding season. And you can see they know where they live. That's going down that hole, and that's going down that hole. And there are big arguments over territory. This is something the visitor doesn't really see. They'll see the puffins at the Wick, and they'll see them on the way up on the 87 steps. But what they don't see is the early evening, 6 o'clock evening walk. They come out for a walk. So there are several thousand puffins in this picture. And we're just finishing doing a survey over here, which is the most arduous task I've done on Skomer. It means looking at a hole marked by a suitable numerical post for 2 hours, seeing what comes and what goes and whether they've got food or not. And it's extremely hard to do. It's extremely to keep your attention on one hole, which is about a third of a mile away. So you've got a telescope to help you do it. So one of the volunteer tasks. And finishing on puffins, what do they do when they're not on Skomer? Well, they wander quite a lot. They just stick to the places they know. So these are the annual successive wanderings of one particular puffin. And here's another particular puffin. And you can see there's a great similarity from one year to the next for each bird, but not much similarity between birds. And they can, you know, there are birds that fly to Newfoundland and then come back. There are birds that go up to the Baltic and come back. There are birds that go down to the Canaries. There are birds that go into the Mediterranean to the Balearics, Minorca and Majorca. The individual birds have a habit where they like to go, but not collectively. Here's a razorbill next to a puffin. You can see the razorbill is a chunkier bird. It weighs about 1 kilo. Puffin weighs about 300 grams. They're quite small. They're about 10 inches tall. These are about 15 inches. Handsome bird, bill bit like an axe, and they look a bit a knight in armor from the front. And they nest on the cliffs, and they migrate locally, arrive about the same time, leave about the same time, which is early August. And these are guillemots, not on Skomer, but on Ramsey Island, as seen from a boat. And you can see they like crowded living. They're quite happy with 20 square inches of ledge space, which is just enough for a bird and an egg. And there are minor territorial disputes, but that's where they'll land. That's where they'll occupy the next 3 or 4 months, and that's where they'll raise a chick. And this is a guillemot egg. It's very pointy, which by quite a complicated mechanism means it cannot roll off the ledge, which is quite important if you recall what their living accommodation looks like. And so here are the gathered seabirds, again from a boat trip to Ramsey Island. And then up here and not so obvious next to it are two peregrine falcons. And all the islands have resident peregrine falcons and buzzards because there's lots of food. And you can see this is a drop-in takeaway. Plenty of food there. And Skomer, which is only 1 square mile, normally has 3 or 4 pairs of resident peregrines in the summer. Chough, which is a very handsome crow, a bit bigger than a jackdaw, and they predate invertebrates in the soil and live in mini caves on the cliffs. And they're making a comeback. They've always been around West Wales. There are 3 or 4 breeding birds every year on Skomer, and they're now making a comeback in North Cornwall, South Cornwall, the Channel Islands. I think some have reached Devon now. This is an oyster catcher nesting in the bluebell season. She's on an egg, and then a bit later in the season, out for a walk with the chick. They're quite handsome birds. And here's the wildflowers on Skomer. It's a fantastic place for flowers. Herring gull, common enough in Bristol, but there's a breeding colony of about 1,000 on Skomer. And here are, I think, 2 juveniles and an adult. This is mum here, and they're having a punch up. And this is pink campion season. Lesser blackback gull, about the same size as herring gull, but darker back, yellow feet rather than pink. And there's a big colony on Skomer, about 5,000 birds, breeding birds. And here's a teenager, this year's chick, and it's begging food, and parent is eventually gives up and coughs up literally regurgitated fish, which the young one will eat. And finally, on the gull front, great blackback gull. You may not have seen these. They are big and they are brutes. They are eagle size, 6'6" wingspan. They weigh about 3 or 4 kilos, and they are major predators. And in the short break, I'll show you a video of a great blackback gull eating quite a large piece of prey. And there are about 100 pairs of these on Skomer, and they'll eat anything. They eat mainly rabbits. There are a lot of rabbits on Skomer, left over from when it was a rabbit farm, which it was commercially 50, 60 years ago. So they live on rabbits. I've seen them pulling a puffin in 2. They're not very charming, but they are top predator on Skomer. And here are the Manx shearwaters in the day, out at sea, where they're perfectly safe from predation. They're master flyers, but they're really terrible walkers. Their legs are set very far back on their bodies, and they can just creep about. They're never going to get away from a predator on the land. So they restrict their leaving and coming back to the island to the hours of darkness, which is quite spectacular when you're staying there overnight. In its natural habitat, absolute master of flight. Basically, it flies to South America without flapping its wings by soaring off the waves. Absolutely fantastic bird. And here's me with this young lady. I've got my hand up a Manx shearwater hole, and out comes a chick. This is in September. So the postgrad students from Oxford University spend the whole summer on the island, and every week they weigh the selection of Manx shearwater chicks to see how they're getting on. And there we are, domestic scales in a kitchen sink, and a plastic box to weigh the shearwater chicks. Their flying weight is about 400 grams. But at the end of August, beginning of September, some of them weigh in at about 660. their parents have already left for South America, leaving them absolutely stuffed with fish to finish their wing development. And about the first week in September, they get the urge to come out at night and learn to fly. And they learn to fly in about a week, and then they fly to Argentina. This is the migration track of the Manxie for birds from Skomer and Stockholm, which is more than half the world's population. They set off down past Spain, down the African coast, cross the Atlantic at the narrowest point to Brazil, and settle for our winter, but now their summer. They've changed hemispheres off the coast of southern Brazil and Argentina. And then about February, March, they get the yen to set off to the north again, and this time they go up the western side of the Atlantic, through the Caribbean, up the US and Canada seaboard, and across the Atlantic back to Skomer. And it's a 20,000-mile round trip. It's quite remarkable. And some of them have been known to do it in less than 10 days. And there's a bird that I've not actually seen. There is one sea cliff on Skomer, which has about 100 pairs of these. These are storm petrels, another tube-nosed bird related to the albatross, but very small. They are about the size of a sparrow, and they migrate out into the North Atlantic, where they quite happily spend the winters. And then they come back to these two islands and nest. Not many on Skomer, but a lot more on Stockholm, and they're a lot easier to see there. This is Tim Harting, who's a Skomer long-term volunteer. He comes onto the island for a week every year. In general, the wildlife on Skomer has no fear whatsoever of human beings. So Tim does his survey every year, which involves trapping them, weighing them, looking for various signs of damage and development, and then letting them free. And it takes about a week, and I've been privileged to accompany him on one such occasion. This is the main enemy of the Skomer vole. It's a short-eared owl, and usually 3 or 4 pairs breed on Skomer every year. And they love voles. And in the early part of the season, from now till July, August, the Skomer voles are quite exposed and relatively easy prey for the short ears. And then after that, the bracken grows up over the island, and they're more or less impregnable. So the owls, having bred, and here's an owl chick out in the open. In late June, and they'll raise, and here's another one. They'll raise about 4 chicks, and then they push off the island because they can't get at the food anymore, and they'll go somewhere else, come back next year. There are also little owls. This is a little owl on Skomer. It's not a terribly good picture, but that's the best I've taken. They're quite common, and then you do see them a lot. And here's one of the bunnies, which don't look like wild rabbits. They've got white, they've got black bits. Some are completely black because they're descended from these rabbits that were cultivated for fur and food only a few decades ago. There are about 30,000 left on the island, so there's plenty of them. Porpoise. The seas around Skomer are excellent habitat for porpoise. And there are quite a few resident porpoise families, and you will see them. They fish in the tide races around the rocks and the islands, where prey is brought up, mainly mackerel, and they're regular. They're pretty well all the time. The biggest predator we have that lives on the land is grey seal, Atlantic grey seal, and this is Garland Stone, one of the islands, sub-islands, and you can see there's about 20 of them hauled out of here, and they're there all year round, but from about August on they start to accumulate because it's where they're going to have their pups. The grey seals produce about 250 pups a year during the worst of the Atlantic storms, and there is quite an attrition rate. But it's the Pembrokeshire colony is one of the biggest in southern Britain, and of course this is the home of the Atlantic seal, as most of the population is off the British coast in one place or another. And here is seal pup, an early one in about September, and here's mum, and it's feeding, and they put on about 30 kilos in 3 weeks, and then they're off on their own out to sea. This shows northern gannets off Skomer fishing. And one's just dived here, and there is a shoal of mackerel under here. And at this time, there were also a pod of dolphins, common dolphins, fishing off the island. And I'd hoped to get a snap of one, but I haven't. So that's all the regular visitors. We get irregular visitors as well, and these are my two star irregular visitors. This is a golden oriole. It's on all the migration routes, so you can literally get any bird here. It hung around for a couple of days and then pushed off. And then this is remarkable. This is Ollie from Oxford, how he avoided getting cut to pieces by this and this, I don't know. This is a nearly adult female goshawk which will eat anything, and this was the 4th record ever on Skomer. It had landed in a net for trapping small birds and eaten the lot, had a full crop. He captured it and found out while we were doing a reptile survey. So there are lots of slugworms on Skomer, tens and tens of thousands, because there are lots of worms and lots of toads, lots of slugs. And we happened to be doing a reptile survey, going around these sheets of corrugated iron and seeing what was underneath them. Near the farm, there were very great numbers. And then further away, the numbers lessen off, but there are vast numbers of slow worms. Here's one, they're rather nice creatures, legless lizards, and common lizards, which do have feet. Fewer of those, but they inhabit the damper spots. A couple of toads, which you see in vast numbers at night. And here's Skomer during the bluebell season. It is absolutely spectacular. It is beautiful. And then a month later, it turns pink with the pink campion. So this is the transport method. This is Dale Princess. Carries 50 people and does about 6 trips a day. We have a maximum allowed number of visitors of about 300 in the peak season, and every boat is taken up. And that's Carl, the skipper, who is the nearest thing to a pirate that you'll find anywhere on these islands. And that's those volunteers you saw at the beginning, and me, well, I'm one of them, and we're on our way home on a reasonably calm and empty boat, which is quite nice to have a boat to yourself. Okay, when you're on Skomer, you can see this. This is the island of Grasholm. It's not very big, it's a few hundred meters across, and see it appears to have a white surface. That white coloration is birds. But you get to the island and all the trips arrive from downwind, so you get the whiff of 100,000 turkey-sized seabirds. So these are northern gannets. This bird here is 6'6" wingspan. It's about 4'6" long. It's got a bill, a beak like a kitchen knife, and it's a great predator. It's, I guess, comparable with a golden eagle in size. They nest in these big colonies. We're lucky to have one just off the Welsh coast. And they travel enormous distances, so you'll see them out at Cleveland. You see them off the Cornish coast. And the noise is incredible. Remember, these are really big birds. Some of the chicks have fledged, and you can actually pick out the chicks. This is a chick, except it's the size of a small turkey, and it's got a bill like a kitchen knife. Another one down here. I think a lot of them have fledged by then. This is the closest shot I've got. It's a juvenile. It's about 1 or 2 years old. It's starting to get adult plumage. I need to give some photo credits. The picture of the puffin family on land was due to Abraham Well. The harbour boys to Steve Hartley. The storm petrels due to these two Dutchmen, the Chrysler and Wolf. And Kittiwake to Skomer Wardens. All the other pictures are mine, for good or ill. And Gina Garrigan and Lisa of the Wildlife Trust of South West Wales, it's a bit of a mouthful, gave me a lot of help in preparing this talk. And their website is very informative. So that's it. Any more questions?